You're listening to the Public Health Entrepreneurs Podcast with your host, Dr. Charlotte Huntley. Today, we're talking about the elevator pitch. I used to try to avoid this topic and think, does it really matter? The short answer is yes, it really does matter. Welcome to Public Health Entrepreneurs. I'm Dr. Charlotte Huntley, and this podcast is for anyone building a business that improves health at the population level. You might come from healthcare, law, pharmacy, IT, research, or somewhere completely different. What matters is your focus on population health and entrepreneurship. With 25 years of experience in healthcare, public health, and entrepreneurship, I'm here to help you with the entrepreneurial strategies that drive impact. Today, we're talking about the elevator pitch, a topic that's important for all public health entrepreneurs, whether you're just starting or you've been doing this for several years. With so much networking happening both online and in person as people rebuild their professional communities, knowing how to introduce yourself clearly and quickly has never been more important. Let's start with a simple definition or explanation. Like, what is an elevator pitch? Essentially, it's a shortened version of how you introduce yourself and your business when you're in a situation where you only have maybe a minute, give or take, to introduce yourself and generate some interest on the other end. The person could be your next client or just a member of your community or a friend who's interested in learning a little bit more. Maybe they'll have no interest beyond your introduction. At the point of introduction, you really don't know what direction it could go or possibly go into, which can make it a little extra stressful. I've made it my own mission to gamify this in a way to reduce the stress and just make it fun, have a little bit of fun with this. There's always going to be opportunity for you to introduce yourself and your business. So the more comfortable you are with this part of the process, the better off you'll be. You'll start to enjoy the process and see which introductions lead to more conversations, maybe even work and clients. You'll win some, you'll nail some, and you'll bomb some. And I think it's just something that we need to embrace. That's why I gamify it, to keep it light. But the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. Now, I have a story to share with you, literally an elevator story. I have an office in downtown Columbia, South Carolina, with garage parking that's under the building, so in the lower levels. I remember parking and getting into the elevator to go up to my floor, about 3 stories up from where I parked. I had a lot of stuff in my hands. I had my backpack, I had a laptop and office stuff and boxes and just everything. A woman jumped on the elevator right after me and asked me to push her floor button. And we started a conversation, just greetings at first. And then she goes, "So what do you do?" Because it was the first time we had seen each other in this building. When she asked that question, I literally had only a few seconds to respond. From where I parked to my office was only about 3 floors, and we had already been having a little chat going on that travel. We'd already started traveling. I was clearly distracted by whatever I was trying to carry into the office, and I managed to stumble through something that sounded interesting enough. I did bump into her a little bit later in our break room, and she had been thinking about what I said. She continued the conversation, luckily for me. In that moment, all I could think of was, I don't even have a card I can get to put in her hand, like nothing. I chuckled about it, but it also put me on a mission to really improve my elevator pitch. So in those situations where you only have a few moments, it's really important to be comfortable with explaining and introducing yourself, explaining what you do in a very short window. That's essentially what this is about. My goal is to make it really easy to communicate no matter what the situation is, and to be able to communicate with someone who was interested a little bit in learning more about what I do in a way that could be thought-provoking and generate interest in the right person. So this matters because you really don't know where your next client is coming from. Not only that, when you meet someone and get to know them. They may genuinely like you and be interested, but not be your ideal client type. But they will be an evangelist for your business. They'll go out and tell other people about what you do and how you serve and bring clients your way. So we need to make sure that these people are equipped with a proper introduction in a way that people can understand what you do. Here's an example from my own journey. I'm an epidemiologist by trade, and I removed the word epidemiology from my introduction because it's an assumption that other people understand what epidemiology is. And in my experience, very few people actually understand what I do. So I've been on a mission to explain it without using that scientific jargon. In our previous mastermind group, we practiced elevator pitches regularly in different scenarios. I mean, it's that important. I would read a scenario, we break out into small groups, and they practice with each other. Sometimes you can type out or write out and memorize something, but it's just not the same when you speak it and have a conversation. You don't want to be testing it out for the first time at a conference or in those important situations. So we practice that in our mastermind group settings. And I encourage you to practice this often with people that in maybe your friend circle or people you know, but just constantly practice it so that it is second nature. I watched all of our members in that mastermind group become so much more confident in introducing themselves. And it was just really wonderful to witness. So here are just a few components that I'd like to note that I think are essential. At the very minimum, your elevator pitch should include what you do or the problem you solve and who you serve or your ideal client. All right, so I'm going to use the example of a grant writer, which I like to use this example. Let's say you're a grant writer and you focus on federal grants. Your pitch might be, I'm a grant writer for nonprofit organizations. I help them receive funding through federal opportunities. That's it. Simple and clear. When you walk away, that person knows, I just met someone who's a grant writer for nonprofit organizations. Then maybe a couple of weeks later, they'll bump into a colleague who's an executive director at a nonprofit organization, and they'll say, I just met this person, and then they'll proceed to talk about you. That happens a lot. You want to be that person. You want to pop in people's minds when they're in conversations that speak to what you do and who you serve. If what you do is a commonly recognized field like grant writing, lead with that. If it's something like epidemiology, come up with a way to explain it that's more common and relatable. The key is to make sure that your introduction includes what you do through your company and who you serve or your ideal client. So here are a few tips for your elevator pitch. Stay clear on who you are. You don't always know your audience. In other words, you don't know if the person you're speaking to is your ideal client or if it's someone who's not going to be interested at all. So don't try to mix up your message to fit the person. Just be clear on who you are and lead with that. All right, here's my second tip. Keep it concise. You don't have to put everything in that introduction. We serve, we do this, and we do that, and we have all of these products. No, just stick to the problem you solve or the value proposition and who you serve. Let the follow-up questions give you the opportunity to go into more detail and explain more. That's where the conversation gets generated. The purpose of the elevator pitch is to give that quick introduction. You'll know if they're interested or not based on their follow-up questions. And if they don't ask any follow-up questions, that's okay. But sometimes that just opens the conversation, and then you can go back and forth with detail. All right, my tip number 3 is to consider a hook. And that's, if it works for you. If you can start with something really creative or clever, something that makes it engaging or intriguing, that's great. Maybe what you do could be equated to a movie or something popular or trending. This doesn't work for everyone, including me right now and how I introduce my business. But if you can find a way to make it memorable or relatable through a quick story or reference, it can work really well. Now, a bit of caution here is if you lead with a quick hook or story, It needs to be something really mainstream or really obvious and very likely to be top of mind for people. All right, here's my next tip for you. And it's kind of my final tip. And that is practice, practice, practice. This is probably the biggest tip I can give you because, like I said, don't just write it down and say, okay, I've got it somewhere. You really need to say it out loud. Practice, practice, practice. And these are a few examples of how you can practice. Talk in the mirror. I think it feels awkward at first, but that's really helpful because sometimes we're our own worst critic, right? So I'm not telling you to criticize yourself, but speaking in a mirror feels much more like speaking to someone else. So talk in the mirror, say your elevator pitch, record yourself, either video or audio or both. Pretend you're introducing yourself to yourself. But just practice that introduction and make it genuine. Or maybe you can imagine that who you're talking to is whoever you want to imagine that being. Create different scenarios. I did this for our mastermind group. So these situations where you might literally need to be able to introduce yourself and you only have a few moments to make it more real and to really help you get into that practice mode. And do it repeatedly. Practice is even more important now as you're rebuilding connections. Maybe you had a pivot during 2025, or maybe you're just getting started and it still feels very awkward and new. And maybe there's a lot of open space. You're not quite sure, but it's more important even, I think, now than ever to be practicing as we're rebuilding connections and meeting new people. The more comfortable you are with your introduction, the more opportunities you'll create. And that is true. That you can really count on. As we begin to wrap this up, I want you to remember to make sure that when you introduce yourself, you're being concise and simple. Make sure that it includes what you do. In other words, the problem you're solving. Make sure that it includes who you serve or your ideal client. And make sure that it's clear and relatable. Then practice, 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 and practice some more. There's no point where you just reach perfection and you're done. It may get to an optimal point, but things change. So don't get too comfortable with this part. Always exercise it, always practice, always take advantage of an opportunity to share your elevator pitch. And remember, you're making it easy for people to remember you and to refer you. That's the goal. Now, I encourage you to explore our website at publichealthentrepreneurs.com and make sure that you're subscribed to our Public Health Entrepreneurs newsletter so that you receive updates about our podcast episodes, programs, and events. We often have virtual and in-person events and opportunities to ask questions, engage, and practice these scenarios like I'm describing on this episode. All right, everyone. Until next time, have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you for listening. Visit publichealthentrepreneurs.com to learn more.